Aliens laughed at Earth's ancient tanks, then the galaxy witnessed humanity unbound. The mockery. The observation deck of Nexus Prime stretched before Commander Elena Vasquez like a cathedral of glass and light. Beyond the transparent walls, 36 starships from across the galaxy hung in perfect formation, each one a masterpiece of alien engineering that made Earth's vessels look like toys by comparison. Elena adjusted her dress uniform and tried to ignore the nervous flutter in her stomach. She had prepared for this moment for 6 months, rehearsing every word, anticipating every question. Today, humanity would present its case for full membership in the Galactic Defense Alliance. The summit chamber itself was vast enough to hold 5,000 beings. Representatives from 42 civilizations filled the tiered seating, their forms as varied as the stars themselves. The Zephrons occupied the eastern gallery, their crystalline bodies refracting light into rainbow patterns across the walls. Each one stood 3 meters tall, their bodies composed of living diamond that pulsed with inner luminescence. To the west sat the Krell Dominion delegates, biomechanical beings whose organic and synthetic components were so perfectly integrated that no seam showed between flesh and metal. Their reputation as the galaxy's premier warriors preceded them. Above them all, suspended in containment fields of pure energy, floated the Luminex Collective, beings of conscious light who communicated through color and frequency rather than sound. Elena took her position at the central platform as the chamber fell silent. A holographic emitter activated, projecting 3-dimensional images around her. She began with confidence, her voice steady and clear. Honored delegates, I am Commander Elena Vasquez of the United Earth Defense Force. Today I present our military capabilities and request full Alliance membership. The first hologram materialized, showing Earth's MBT-9 Warhammer, humanity's most advanced main battle tank. The vehicle bristled with weapons, its composite armor gleaming under the projection lights. Our primary ground assault platform features a 150mm electromagnetic railgun, reactive armor plating, and all-terrain tracked propulsion. It can operate in any environment from Arctic tundra to volcanic wastes. A sound rippled through the chamber. It took Elena a moment to recognize it as laughter. A Zephron delegate named Crystallix rose, his form chiming musically as he moved. Forgive the interruption, Commander, but did you say your vehicle moves on tracks? Physical tracks that touch the ground? Elena felt heat rise to her cheeks. Yes, that is correct. Our tracked systems provide exceptional... Fascinating, Crystallix interrupted, his tone dripping with condescension. He gestured with a limb that refracted light like a prism, and his own hologram appeared beside Elena's tank. It showed a vehicle that seemed to defy physics itself, hovering a meter above any surface, its hull surrounded by a shimmering field of distorted space. This is our standard reconnaissance platform. It manipulates gravitational fields to achieve speeds of 600 kilometers per hour. It can phase through solid matter when threatened. It requires no physical contact with terrain and leaves no tracks or evidence of passage. More laughter echoed through the chamber. Elena gritted her teeth but maintained her composure. Our systems prioritize reliability and... A Krell commander interrupted, his voice a blend of organic and synthetic tones. Commander Vasquez, our battle units regenerate damage in real time. They adapt their weapons configurations based on threats encountered. They interface directly with their pilots through neural links. And yet you present us with machines that rely on mechanical treads and explosive projectiles. The presentation continued, but the damage was already done. Elena showed Earth's fighters, artillery systems, and naval vessels, but each display was met with barely concealed amusement. When she demonstrated humanity's small arms, a plasma rifle that fired magnetically accelerated projectiles, a Luminex delegate pulsed with colors that the translator rendered as mockery. We create weapons from thought itself, Commander. They materialize when needed and dissipate when not. They require no ammunition, no maintenance, and adapt instantly to any target. The final blow came when Elena presented Earth's space superiority fighters. A Krell general named Thex-9 actually stood up, his mechanical components whirring. These vessels use chemical rockets for propulsion. In the year 2287, Commander, we abandoned such primitive technology 3,000 years ago. Our fighters fold space itself to achieve faster-than-light maneuvering in combat. They are powered by contained singularities. They can survive in any environment, including the interior of stars. When the presentation ended, the chamber erupted in discussions. Elena stood alone on the platform, feeling smaller with each passing second. The Council's military committee deliberated for exactly 8 minutes. Then Kristallix, as committee chairman, delivered their verdict with words that cut like glass. The Galactic Defense Alliance appreciates Earth's enthusiasm and courage. However, your military capabilities do not meet the standards required for full membership. We are prepared to offer provisional associate status, which allows Earth to contribute resources and cultural exchanges while receiving protection from Alliance forces. Elena's jaw tightened. What you're saying is that we're not good enough to fight beside you. We are saying, Kristallix replied with exaggerated patience, that your technology is simply too far behind our own. Sending your forces into combat against threats we face would be tantamount to murder. We cannot in good conscience allow it. The meeting adjourned. As alien delegates filed out, Elena heard their continued laughter, saw them gesturing at her holograms that still floated in the air. Within hours, she knew recordings of the presentation would spread across the galactic network. Earth's tanks with their treads and tracks would become jokes told in bars on 1,000 worlds. The journey back to Earth took 3 weeks. Elena spent most of it in her quarters, reviewing every moment of the presentation, searching for what she could have done differently. But she knew the truth. It wasn't about presentation. The aliens simply couldn't see past their own technological superiority. To them, anything less advanced was worthless. When she finally reached Earth, Elena found herself drawn to the Military Heritage Academy in Colorado, where her grandfather had taught before his death. The current commandant, an old colleague of her family, gave her private access to the historical halls after hours. She walked through corridors lined with weapons and vehicles from humanity's past, each one representing a revolution in warfare for its time. Elena stopped before a World War II-era Sherman tank. Its armor was thin by modern standards, its gun small, its speed laughable. And yet this machine and others like it had helped defeat tyranny and change the course of human history. She placed her hand on the cold metal hull. "They laughed at us," she said quietly to the empty hall. Her communicator chimed. The message was marked Priority Alpha, highest urgency. Elena opened it and felt her blood turn cold. Unknown energy signatures had been detected at the galaxy's edge, massive beyond anything in recorded history. The readings matched descriptions from ancient archives, warnings left by civilizations long dead. Something was coming. Something old and hungry and terrible. And the galaxy's perfect. Advanced weapons were about to face their first real test. Elena looked back at the Sherman tank, then at her own reflection in its worn metal surface. She smiled grimly. History, she thought, had a funny way of repeating itself. And humanity had always been very good at proving doubters wrong. She just hoped they would get the chance before it was too late. The swarm awakens. The first warning came from Observation Station Gamma 7, a Zephyron outpost positioned at the galaxy's edge, where civilized space met the vast emptiness beyond. The station's sensors had been monitoring the dark for 3 centuries without incident, a silent vigil that had become routine, almost ceremonial. Then at 0342 Standard Galactic Time, every alarm system activated simultaneously. Chief Observer Harmonix was in the middle of his rest cycle when the emergency protocols pulled him from crystalline sleep. His form pulsed with confusion as he materialized at the central monitoring station. The displays showed readings that made no sense. Energy signatures were appearing across a front 3 light-years wide, each one massive enough to dwarf a star. But these weren't stars. They were moving with purpose and terrible speed. "Get me a visual," Harmonix commanded, his inner light flickering with the first touch of fear he had felt in 200 years. The main screen resolved into clarity, and Harmonix understood why ancient civilizations had left warnings in their archives. The Devourers had returned. They emerged from dark space like a plague of metal locusts, thousands of them, then millions. Each construct was the size of a city, its surface a nightmare of angles and geometries that hurt to look at directly. They weren't built according to any aesthetic or design philosophy. They were purely functional, entities whose only purpose was consumption and adaptation. As Harmonix watched in horror, the swarm reached the first Zephyron colony world on the frontier. The planet's defensive satellites activated immediately, unleashing plasma bombardments that could vaporize mountains. The Devourers absorbed the plasma streams like sponges drinking water. Their hulls rippled and changed, incorporating the energy into their own structure. Within seconds, they were firing the same plasma back at the satellites. Having analyzed, understood, and replicated the technology in the time it took for Harmonix to broadcast a warning, the colony world fell in 17 minutes. Across the galaxy, emergency broadcasts activated in every language and format known to civilization. The Galactic Defense Alliance mobilized with practiced efficiency, centuries of peace having done nothing to dull their readiness protocols. Within 48 hours, the largest military fleet in recorded history assembled at the Verge, the traditional boundary between the galaxy's spiral arms and the outer darkness. Commander Thex 9 of the Krell Dominion led the armada from his flagship, the Inevitability. His biomechanical form interfaced directly with the ship's neural network, giving him real-time awareness of every vessel under his command. 2,000 warships representing the combined might of 42 civilizations hung in formation against the backdrop of stars. It was a sight that should have inspired confidence. Instead, Thex 9 felt something his enhanced psychology had been designed to suppress: doubt. The Devourers arrived 6 hours later. They didn't approach cautiously or attempt communication. They simply came, a wall of mechanical horror stretching across the visual spectrum, blotting out stars as they advanced. Thex 9 gave the order, and the fleet opened fire. Reality-warping missiles that could fold space itself streaked toward the enemy. Quantum disruptors that unraveled matter at the subatomic level painted the void with impossible colors. Gravitational shear weapons that could tear moons apart activated in sequence. The combined firepower of 42 civilizations' most advanced technology converged on the Devourer vanguard. For exactly 43 seconds, it looked like the assault might work. Devourer constructs shattered and broke apart, their hulls unable to withstand the concentrated assault. Then the adaptation began. Thex 9 watched through his neural link as the enemy analyzed every weapon system being used against them. The Devourer's surfaces rippled and reformed, developing new configurations in real time. Reality-warping missiles found their space-folding effects inverted, sending them back toward the Alliance fleet. Quantum disruptors encountered hulls that existed in probability states, making them impossible to fully unravel. Gravitational weapons met counter-gravitational fields that neutralized them completely. Within 5 minutes, the Devourers had adapted to every weapon in the Alliance arsenal. The retreat order came too late. The Devourers surged forward, their own weapons now mirror images of what had been used against them. Alliance ships began dying, their advanced shields and armor proving useless against technology turned back on its creators. Thex 9's flagship shuddered as a reality-warping strike tore through its hull, systems that should have been impossible to damage failing, as the Devourers demonstrated their mastery of adaptive warfare. The fleet broke and scattered. Of 2,000 ships that had assembled with such confidence, fewer than 800 escaped. The rest became wreckage and debris, monuments to the futility of fighting an enemy that learned from every encounter. Over the next 2 weeks, the pattern repeated across 6 star systems. The Luminex Collective deployed their thought weapons, constructs of pure consciousness that could unmake matter through will alone. The Devourers absorbed them, learned them, and began producing their own consciousness-destroying fields. The Zephrons unleashed resonance bombs that could shatter entire fleets through harmonic destruction. The Devourers analyzed the frequencies and started emitting counter-resonances that turned the Zephron ships themselves into bombs. Every advanced technology, every sophisticated weapon system, every marvel of galactic engineering became just another tool in the Devourer's arsenal within minutes of first encounter. The more complex the technology, the faster they adapted. The more powerful the weapon, the more devastating it became when turned against its creators. Crystallix, who had once laughed at Earth's primitive tanks, stood in the emergency council chamber on Nexus Prime and spoke words he never thought he would say. "We are losing. Every world we try to defend falls. Every fleet we send is either destroyed or forced to retreat. The Devourers are not just matching our technology, they are exceeding it." "How is this possible?" demanded a Luminex representative, their colors pulsing with panic. "We have weapons that manipulate the fundamental forces of reality itself. And the Devourers learned to manipulate them better," Crystallix replied. his usual arrogance replaced by hollow desperation. They are not just copying our technology, they are improving it, understanding it in ways we never could. Every advance we have made over 10,000 years of civilization has become a weapon in their hands. The council chamber fell silent. Representatives from 42 civilizations, each one proud of their technological achievements, faced a truth that shattered their worldview. Their sophistication had become their greatest weakness. Finally, a Krell admiral named Vex 12 spoke the words everyone was thinking, but no one wanted to say. "We need the humans." "The humans?" Krystallix's form flickered with disbelief. "Their weapons are 800 years old. They use gunpowder and metal projectiles. What could they possibly do that we cannot?" "Exactly," Vex 12 replied. "The Devourers adapt to sophisticated technology. Perhaps they cannot adapt to something so fundamentally simple." The debate lasted 3 hours, pride warring with desperation in every delegate. Finally, practicality won. A message was transmitted to Earth, a request for assistance from beings who had mocked humanity's military just months before. The wording was careful, diplomatic, but the truth underneath was clear. The galaxy's most advanced civilizations were begging for help from the species they had dismissed as primitive. On Earth, Commander Elena Vasquez received the transmission in her office at Defense Command. She read it twice, then called her staff together. As she explained the situation, she saw the same emotions on their faces that she felt herself. Vindication, certainly, but also grim determination. "They laughed at our tanks," her second-in-command said quietly. "Now they want us to save them with those same tanks." Elena looked out the window at the military base below, where crews were already beginning mobilization procedures. Ancient but reliable vehicles rolled out of storage facilities. Soldiers checked weapons that their great-grandparents might have used. Simple technology, proven technology, technology that didn't rely on exotic physics or reality manipulation. "Prepare the fleet," Elena ordered. "Every tank, every artillery piece, every conventional weapon we have. If the Devourers want to see what happens when they face technology they can't outsmart, we'll show them." As Earth's forces began their deployment, one fact became clear across the galaxy. The Devourers had spent weeks adapting to the most advanced technology in known space. Now they would face something entirely different. Weapons so simple, so fundamentally physical, that there was nothing to adapt to except the unchanging laws of physics themselves. And physics, as humanity had learned over thousands of years of warfare, didn't care how intelligent you were. Hell unleashed. The transport fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Veridan 7 system, and every alien observer monitoring the approach felt their confidence waver. The human vessels were not sleek or elegant. They were blunt, functional objects that looked more like cargo haulers than warships. Their hulls showed rivets and welds. Their engines burned with chemical fire visible even across the void of space. They looked, quite frankly, like they belonged in a museum. Commander Elena Vasquez stood on the bridge of the UEDS Resolute, watching tactical displays that showed the nightmare waiting below. Veridan 7 had been a thriving colony world 3 days ago, home to 4 million Zephyron civilians and a defensive garrison. Now it was the Devourer's forward operating base, its surface crawling with millions of adaptive constructs that had learned to counter every weapon the Alliance possessed. "All ships report ready for atmospheric entry," her tactical officer reported. Lieutenant Chen was young, barely 30, but his voice was steady. He had been briefed on what they faced. They all had. "Begin deployment sequence," Elena ordered. "Launch the entry pods." What followed would have made any Zephyron or Krell military observer weep with frustration. Instead of elegant orbital insertion using gravitational manipulation, the human ships simply opened their cargo bays and released hundreds of entry pods. These pods were literally nothing more than reinforced metal shells with heat shields and parachutes, technology that predated human spaceflight. They fell toward Veridan 7's surface like rain, crude and inelegant and absolutely reliable. Inside one of those pods, Sergeant Marcus Webb checked his rifle for the 100th time. The weapon in his hands was an XM9, a design that traced its lineage back to the AK-47 through 7 centuries of incremental improvements. It fired 7.62mm rounds using chemical propellant. It had exactly 47 moving parts. A child could field strip and reassemble it in under 2 minutes. 30 seconds to ground, came the announcement. Webb's squad sat in silence, each one gripping weapons that would have made the aliens laugh. Assault rifles, grenade launchers, portable missile systems, all using technology that was fundamentally unchanged from what human soldiers had carried into battle 500 years ago. The pod hit the ground hard enough to rattle teeth. The doors blew open and Webb's squad deployed into hell. Veridan 7's surface was no longer recognizable as a colony world. Devourer constructs had transformed it into a biomechanical nightmare, structures of metal and something not quite flesh covering every surface. And they were moving, thousands of them converging on the human landing zones with terrifying speed. "Contact front," someone shouted, and Webb brought his rifle up. The Devourers came like a wave of liquid metal, their forms shifting and adapting even as they moved. These constructs had fought the Zephrons, the Krell, the Luminex. They had learned to counter plasma fire, reality manipulation, thought weapons. They approached the humans with complete confidence. Then Webb and 50,000 other human soldiers opened fire. The sound was deafening, a roar of chemical explosions and supersonic projectiles that hadn't been heard on a battlefield in decades. Tracer rounds painted lines of fire through the air. Grenade explosions threw up geysers of dirt and shattered metal. And the Devourers, for the first time since their awakening, faltered. Kinetic rounds tore through their adaptive hulls like paper. They tried to adjust, tried to develop defenses, but there was nothing to adapt to. A bullet was just metal and velocity. You couldn't analyze it, couldn't reverse engineer it, couldn't turn it back on its user. You could only make your armor thicker, and that took time. Time that humanity didn't give them. "Armor, advance," came the order across command channels, and the tanks rolled forward. The MBT-9 Warhammers came in lines, their tracks grinding across the broken ground with mechanical precision. They looked primitive next to the hovering vehicles the aliens used, but that primitiveness was their strength. When the Devourers tried to disrupt their propulsion systems, they found nothing to disrupt. The tanks ran on diesel engines and mechanical transmissions. When they tried to interfere with their weapons, they found electromagnetically accelerated metal rounds that followed ballistic trajectories. Simple physics. Unchanging physics, the tanks opened fire and the results were devastating. 150mm projectiles struck Devourer constructs at velocities exceeding 2 kilometers per second. The constructs shattered, their adaptive abilities useless against pure kinetic energy. They tried to develop thicker armor, but the humans simply switched to armor-piercing rounds with depleted uranium cores. They tried to scatter and overwhelm through numbers, and human artillery answered with carpet bombardment that turned square kilometers into cratered wastes. High above the battlefield, Krystallix watched from a monitoring station, his crystalline form pulsing with colors that indicated confusion, approaching disbelief. "This is impossible," he said to no one in particular. "The Devourers adapt to everything. They have countered every weapon system in the galaxy. How are primitive kinetic weapons defeating them?" Commander Thex 9, standing beside him with his biomechanical form showing damage from previous battles, actually laughed. It was a sound his enhanced psychology shouldn't have been capable of producing. "Because there is nothing to adapt to," he said, understanding finally dawning. "You cannot outsmart gravity. You cannot reverse engineer an explosion. You cannot turn momentum back on its source. The humans are using physics itself as a weapon, and physics does not care how intelligent you are." On the ground, Elena Vasquez had deployed with her command unit, leading from the front in a way that alien commanders never did. She stood in the turret of her command tank, watching as human doctrine, real ancient Earth-born military doctrine, tore through an enemy that had seemed unstoppable. "All units advance by sectors," she ordered. "Infantry, clear those structures. Armor, maintain formation. Artillery, I want fire missions on coordinates Delta 7 through Delta 12. The artillery came next, and if the aliens thought tanks were primitive, the artillery made them question reality itself. These weren't precision plasma strikes or quantum missiles. These were 155mm howitzers that could have been used at Verdun or the Somme, upgraded with better metallurgy and targeting computers, but fundamentally identical to weapons from humanity's bloodiest century. They fired in massed volleys, hundreds of guns simultaneously, sending tons of high explosive arcing through the air in ballistic trajectories. The shells came down like rain, carpeting entire grid squares with overlapping explosions. The Devourers tried to develop point defense systems, but there were too many shells coming too fast. from too many directions. For the first time in their existence, the Devourers encountered a problem they couldn't adapt their way out of. They could make their constructs tougher, but that made them slower. They could make them faster, but that made them more fragile. They could spread out to avoid concentrated fire, but that made them vulnerable to being defeated in detail. Every solution created new problems, and the humans exploited every weakness with brutal efficiency. The turning point came on the third day of the battle. The Devourers had concentrated their forces around their central processing node, a construct the size of a mountain that coordinated the entire swarm on Veridan 7. Alliance forces had tried to destroy it 3 times with quantum weapons and reality-warping strikes. Each time it had adapted and survived. Elena looked at the target through her binoculars and smiled grimly. "Get me the bomber wing." What appeared over the horizon would have made military historians weep with joy. B-97 Thunderbirds, heavy bombers whose basic design dated back to the B-52 Stratofortress of the 1950s. They had been updated countless times over 7 centuries, but they still did one thing better than any other aircraft humanity had ever built. They carried enormous payloads over long distances and dropped them on targets. Bomber wing. "This is ground command," Elena transmitted. "You are cleared hot on the primary target. Give them everything you have." The bombers came in low and slow, their turbofan engines roaring. The Devourers tried to shoot them down, but their adaptive point defense systems had been optimized for fighting fast-moving energy weapons. The bombers, cruising at subsonic speeds, were too slow and too heavily armored to be easily stopped. They opened their bomb bays over the target, and 200 tons of high explosive fell toward the Devourer processing node. Not quantum weapons, not plasma strikes, just conventional bombs. The kind that humanity had been building for 800 years because sometimes the old ways worked best. The explosions were visible from orbit. The processing node, which had survived reality-warping attacks, simply ceased to exist under the weight of conventional ordnance. And with it gone, the Devourers on Veridan 7 lost their coordination. The human ground forces pressed the attack, tanks and infantry advancing in combined arms assaults that would have been recognized by commanders from World War II or the Iraq War. They cleared the Devourer sector by sector, building by building, using tactics that were older than spaceflight but proven through centuries of warfare. By the end of the 5th day, Veridan 7 was liberated. Human soldiers raised Earth's flag over the ruins of the last Devourer hive, and across the galaxy, observers who had once mocked humanity's primitive weapons fell silent. Kristallix stood in the council chamber and spoke words that would echo through history. "We were wrong. Not about their technology being old, but about what that meant. We thought advancement was always better. We thought sophistication was always superior. The humans taught us that sometimes the old ways endure because they work, because they are reliable, because they do not need to be perfect, only sufficient." The Galactic Defense Alliance formally requested full human integration that same day. But more importantly, they asked for something else: teachers. Human military instructors were dispatched to every major training facility in the Alliance, teaching principles that seemed revolutionary to species that had forgotten them: simplicity over sophistication, reliability over performance, proven methods over cutting-edge technology. Elena Vasquez stood on Veridan 7's surface, watching as reconstruction crews began the long work of rebuilding. A Krell commander approached her, his biomechanical form showing new respect in every movement. "Commander, I must know," Thex 9 said. "When we laughed at your presentation, did you know? Did you know that your old weapons would be what saved us?" Elena thought about that for a moment, remembering the mockery in the council chamber, the laughter at humanity's tanks and rifles. "No," she said honestly, "but we knew something you had forgotten. That war isn't about having the best weapon. It is about having a weapon that works when everything else fails. That's what we brought to this fight. Not sophistication, but certainty." She looked up at the stars where the Devourers had retreated to lick their wounds and contemplate their first defeat. They would be back eventually, more adapted, more dangerous. But when they returned, they would face a galaxy that had remembered old truths. Physics was eternal. Simplicity was strength. And humanity, with its ancient tanks and old rifles, had proven that sometimes the most primitive solution was exactly what the universe needed. The galaxy had witnessed humanity unbound, and it would never laugh at old weapons again. The Galactic War College on Nexus Prime had stood for 4,000 years as a monument to advanced military thinking. Its halls had produced the greatest strategic minds in known space. Officers who understood quantum battlefield dynamics, reality manipulation tactics, and consciousness-based warfare. Now those same halls echoed with sounds that hadn't been heard there before. The rhythmic cadence of marching feet and the sharp bark of drill instructors. Commander Elena Vasquez walked through the main training grounds 6 months after the victory at Veridan 7, observing a sight that would have been unthinkable a year ago. 500 alien cadets from 30 different species stood in formation on the parade ground, and they were learning to march, not glide using gravitational manipulation, not phase through space. March 1 foot in front of the other in perfect synchronized steps, left, right, bellowed Sergeant Marcus Webb, who had traded his combat rifle for an instructor's position. I don't care if your species has hover technology. When your power systems fail, when your gravitic generators go offline, you need to know how to move under your own power. Again, the Zephron cadets struggled the most. Their crystalline bodies had never been designed for walking, let alone marching. But they were learning, adapting in ways their civilization hadn't required them to in millennia. Beside them, Krell cadets whose biomechanical enhancements let them interface directly with vehicles were being taught to drive tanks manually, using physical controls and direct observation instead of neural links. Elena's communicator chimed. The display showed Krystallix requesting a meeting. She made her way to what had been renamed the Heritage Hall, a section of the college now dedicated to human military history. Krystallix waited inside, his form pulsing with colors that indicated thoughtful contemplation. The Zephron stood before a display case containing an M1 Garand rifle, a weapon over 900 years old. I have been studying your history, Krystallix said without preamble, his voice carrying none of its former arrogance. This weapon was used in what you call World War II. It fired 8 rounds before requiring reload. It was considered revolutionary at the time. It was, Elena confirmed, semi-automatic when most armies still used bolt-action rifles. My great-great-grandfather carried one at Normandy. We have weapons that fire 10,000 rounds per minute using plasma that can melt through starship armor, Krystallix said. And yet this simple rifle would have been more effective against the Devourers than anything my civilization has produced in 3,000 years. I am trying to understand how we became so foolish. Elena moved to stand beside him. You weren't foolish. You were optimizing for different problems. Your weapons are magnificent for fighting enemies who use similar technology. The Devourers just happened to be the one enemy where sophistication became a liability. But you knew this, Krystallix pressed. Your civilization maintained old weapons, old tactics, old ways of war even as you developed advanced technology. Why? Elena smiled and gestured across the hall at the displays of human military equipment spanning centuries. Because we remembered what happens when you forget the fundamentals. We had a saying in our military academies. Amateurs talk strategy. Professionals talk logistics. It means that fancy tactics don't matter if your supply chains fail, if your weapons break, if your soldiers can't perform basic tasks without advanced technology. She led Krystallix to another display, this one showing a simple combat knife. This blade design is 1,100 years old. We still issue them to every soldier. Not because we can't make better knives, but because sometimes you need a tool that will never fail, never need power, never malfunction. That philosophy extends to everything we do. Across the college, similar lessons were being taught in dozens of classrooms. Colonel James Morrison, who had led the armor assault on Veridan 7, stood before a mixed class of 200 alien officers and held up a wrench. This is a torque wrench, Morrison said. Simple tool. You use it to tighten bolts to specific tensions. Every human tank crew carries one. How many of you can perform field repairs on your vehicles? Silence greeted his question. Finally, a Krell commander raised a mechanical appendage. Our vehicles self-repair using nanomachine swarms. Manual maintenance is not necessary. What happens when your nanomachines are destroyed or compromised? Morrison asked. What happens when you're cut off from resupply and your self-repair systems fail? The Krell commander had no answer. Morrison pulled back a tarp, revealing a tracked vehicle that made several aliens gasp. It was an actual M4 Sherman tank from Earth's World War II. Lovingly restored and maintained. This machine is over 850 years old. It still runs. You know why? Because every single part can be repaired or replaced with basic tools and raw materials. The engine is simple. The transmission is mechanical. The armor is just steel. Nothing fancy. Nothing that requires specialized facilities to maintain. He climbed onto the tank and opened the engine compartment. In 2 days, I'm going to teach every officer in this room how to perform basic maintenance on this tank. You're going to get your hands dirty. You're going to learn how machines actually work, not just how to interface with them through neural links or thought commands, because when you understand the fundamentals, you can adapt to anything. The transformation happening at the War College was replicated across the galaxy. On Krell Prime, human instructors taught biomechanical warriors how to fight without their enhancement systems. On the Luminex homeworld, beings of pure energy were learning about kinetic weapons and explosive chemistry. On Zephyron colonies, crystalline soldiers practiced with slug throwers and learned that sometimes brute force was more reliable than elegant gravitational manipulation. But the most important lessons weren't about weapons. They were about mindset. Lieutenant Sarah Chen taught a class on military philosophy to a group of senior alien commanders who had centuries of combat experience. She stood before them wearing a simple combat uniform with no advanced materials or integrated technology. Just fabric and boots. Your civilizations have been fighting wars the same way for thousands of years, Chen began. You identified threats, developed technological solutions, then moved on to the next threat and the next solution. This is linear thinking. The Devourers broke you because they could follow that linear progression faster than you could. She activated a holographic display showing a branching tree structure. Human military doctrine is based on redundancy and flexibility. We call it defense in depth. For every problem, we maintain multiple solutions at different technological levels. If our railguns fail, we have conventional cannons. If our cannons fail, we have rockets. If our rockets fail, we have explosives we can throw by hand. We never rely on a single solution, no matter how good it is. A Luminex commander pulsed with confused colors. But this seems inefficient. Why maintain inferior solutions when superior ones exist? Because superior is contextual, Chen replied. A plasma rifle is superior to a bullet-firing rifle in most situations. But if you're fighting in an electromagnetic storm that disrupts plasma containment, suddenly that inferior bullet rifle is the only weapon that works. We learned long ago that the best weapon is the one that functions when you need it, not the one that performs best under ideal conditions. The alien commanders struggled with this concept. Their civilizations had spent millennia climbing a technological ladder, each rung representing advancement over what came before. The human approach felt like climbing down that ladder, like regression rather than progress. Colonel Morrison addressed this directly in another session. You think we're asking you to give up your advanced weapons? We're not. Keep your plasma rifles, your reality-warping missiles, your quantum disruptors. Use them. They're excellent weapons. But also keep some old-fashioned explosives in your arsenal. Maintain some kinetic weapons. Train your soldiers to fight with basic tools, because the day will come when your advanced systems fail. And on that day, the civilization that remembered the old ways will survive while those that forgot them will perish. He paused, letting that sink in. The Devourers taught you this lesson at tremendous cost. Millions died because your civilizations had no backup plans, no alternative methods, no depth to your strategic thinking. Don't let their deaths be meaningless. Learn what they died to teach you. The training intensified over the following months. Alien soldiers who had never carried more than a few pounds of equipment learned to march with full combat loads weighing 60 pounds. Officers who had commanded fleets through neural interfaces learned to read paper maps and use manual navigation. Technicians who could manipulate quantum states were taught basic mechanical engineering and chemical engineering. It was humbling for civilizations that had considered themselves the pinnacle of advancement. Watching their soldiers struggle with tasks that human recruits mastered in basic training was a daily reminder of how far they had drifted from fundamental competence. Comment for next comment.